Have you ever had that one cartoon or animated series that stood out to you? Whether it had remarkable animation, unique story ideas, relatable characters, you get the idea. I don't think I'll ever be able to go an entire video without even mentioning the Powerpuff Girls, but it's about time that I give other cartoons and television shows the attention they deserve. This video in particular is going to be centering around a beloved cartoon known as Samurai Jack. It was a show that ran on Cartoon Network from 2001 to 2004 and received critical acclaim in a very short period of time. In fact, this is one of those shows that has actually gotten more popular after its original run ended. But what exactly is it about? The show itself takes place long ago in a distant land. Aku, an evil shape-shifting master of darkness, tries to take over the world but is opposed by a lone samurai warrior wielding his family's magic sword. After a fierce battle, Aku manages to throw the samurai several years into the future where his evil is the law of the land. Now we see the warrior on his quest to vanquish Aku and return the world to the way it was before his tyranny began. Do you want to know what my favorite thing about that plot summary is? I got it all from the opening sequence alone. Literally, the entire basis for the show is told in the first 40 seconds of each episode. This makes it very easy for almost anyone to hop right into the show and get a general idea of what's going on. Samurai Jack also does what I personally think is the best strategy when it comes to telling stories in cartoons. It has an overarching plot that both develops Jack's character and adds to the intensity of the situation at hand. Yet every single episode stands alone as their own stories at the same time. This method of storytelling makes it very accessible to people because they can follow the entire series if they want to, but they don't necessarily have to get the enjoyment out of it. The show was originally created by Genndy Tartakovsky. For all three of you who've never heard of him before, he's basically the man who put Cartoon Network on the map. Okay, obviously there were some more people than just him, but he was certainly one of the bigger influences. You may also be familiar with some of his other beloved cartoons like Dexter's Lab, Symbionic Titan, Hotel Transylvania, and the 2003 Star Wars The Clone Wars television series. The idea for this show formed from Genndy's desire to make an action cartoon after he noticed a distinct lack of high-quality shows that could portray good choreography and heart-thumping battles. This led him to take it upon himself to create what would later become Samurai Jack. Genndy took inspiration from a lot of different things when making Samurai Jack, with an exceptional amount of ideas, tropes, and designs from Kung Fu. And no, I'm not speaking of the martial art itself. I actually mean the 1970s television series starring David Carradine. You know, the one where everyone quotes the term grasshopper from. I guess, in a way, this man right here is partially responsible for creating Samurai Jack. Other famous influences of the show include works of Akira Kurosawa, David Lean, Frank Miller's comic Ronin, and the popular theatrical film 300. Genndy described the pitch as a desire to make a highly stylized action show with simple stories and a lot of fighting. Like, a lot of fighting. Genndy wasn't the only person to work on this show. I'm sure some of you are familiar with names such as Paul Rudish, Chris Savino, Mark Andrews, Rob Renzetti, and many, many more. In terms of main characters, the show really only ever focuses on Jack and Aku. Very few secondary characters ever appear more than once in the series, which ultimately assists in making the world seem large and alien to Jack. And it really emphasizes just how alone he really is. I mean seriously, when this show wants to make Jack feel like he's stranded in isolation, it doesn't hold back. Despite how little Jack actually speaks in the show, he's voiced by Phil Lamar, who's also known as Wilt from Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, Green Lantern from the Justice League, and one of my personal favorites, Bulby Struganovsky from Jimmy Neutron.
Slap, 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 clap, 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 slap, 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 clap, 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 slap, slap, slap.
You'll never look at Samurai Jack the same way again. The funny thing is, Jack's name isn't actually Jack. The show never states what his true name is, so the term Jack is just given to him by these three random alien dudes hanging out on the streets in the second episode. Overall, Jack manages to keep a peaceful lifestyle. While he can lose his temper every once in a while, Jack is mostly known for his ability to remain calm and think on his feet. Let me tell you, Jack can get into some pretty tense situations at times. Jack is also a warrior of honor, and he enacts the traits one would have constantly throughout all 4 seasons of the show. He is what I would consider to be the living embodiment of hope and pureness. And then there's Aku, the big bad guy of the show. Voiced by the legendary Mako himself, Aku is a sinister shape-shifting master of darkness that wants nothing more than to rid his kingdom of Jack once and for all. Heck, his name directly translates to evil in Japanese. Just as Jack is the embodiment of hope, Aku is essentially the embodiment of evil. The two exist as vessels for the classic battle of light and darkness. Aku is typically the highlight of the show for many people, myself included. Even though he's normally a force to be reckoned with, he can still be funny when the right situation calls for it.
Human form, got it?
Right.
And no sword?
Right.
The entire exchange between the two of them during this scene is easily one of my favorite moments in the entire series. I want to make note of one more character, the Scotsman. He serves as a great foil because unlike Jack, who is relaxed and collected, the Scotsman tends to be rather loud and arrogant, and it shows. What starts as an early rivalry between the two in the first episode eventually pans out to be a great relationship, and the episodes centering around the duo are the ones I always look forward to. John DiMaggio, how do you do it?
I fear no man. Ooh, that's some tough talk coming from a man who wears a basket on his head.
I'm sure you've noticed by now that outlines don't exist in this show. That's what gives it its own visual design. It feels almost avant-garde in that way. Speaking of film, the episodes also have a very cinematic feel to them. The black bars that run across the screen during intense fights are just the beginning of it. There are lots of extreme close-ups and long shots that build suspense in each episode, and get used to seeing Jack's eyes because they really like to zoom in on them any chance they get. I can also compliment its use of color to reflect the tone of the current situation. When Genndy said he wanted to create an action show, he went all out. This show has so many unbelievably well animated battles that I can't even begin to name them all. The team specifically designed fights with choreography in order to provide the full effect, and it works. One that particularly stands out to me is the fight against the Shadow Warrior. Not only is it a cool fight to watch for the action, but it's an artistic masterpiece. The way light and dark are used to show Jack taking on the enemy is so well crafted that it nearly brings me to tears when watching it. Seeing Jack struggle as the sun starts to set makes it even more difficult for him to defeat the warrior because it's only a matter of time before he's vulnerable again. In order for the show to keep a lower age rating, the team came up with the idea to make all of the enemies robots. It was a convenient workaround at the time, and at least it made sense considering it's in the future anyways. Besides, it doesn't really take away from the full effect of the show in the grand scheme of things. The magical thing about a show like this is that it can be very dark and serious, or comedic and lighthearted depending on what the episode wants to do. Think of it as being similar to Teen Titans in that regard. You know how the Titans would sometimes have to fight for their lives as Slade psychologically destroys them, and then other times they would just chase Mad Mod around a wacky fantasy world full of British stereotypes? The same principles hold true with Samurai Jack. I also love little gags and references thrown in from other shows, such as when Jack wanders around a desolate Townsville during the pilot episodes.
It's good.
It seems him was successful after all. Funny story about those two shows. When I was younger, I used to get Professor Utonium and Samurai Jack confused, so I accidentally thought they were the same character for a while. And do you guys remember that time Huntor showed up? Funny thing is, that's not the only callback in that episode. Now it's time for a segment that I'm going to be including in all of my cartoon reviews. It's what I like to call my 3-episode recommendation, in which I will list 3 episodes of a show that I recommend you watch if you're interested in giving it a shot. Jack and the Lava Monster is one I highly recommend because it centers around a warrior who was imprisoned by Aku so he could not die a noble death. Basically, this lava monster built an impenetrable fortress that only the most skilled warrior could get through. And once Jack stumbles upon his fortress, the two of them have a duel. While Jack is reluctant to fight at first, the monster quickly explains that he wishes to die a warrior's death, thus allowing him to be free once again. Jack and the Ultra Robots easily has one of the best action sequences in the entire series. A mad scientist builds an army of killer assassin robots that cannot be cut by Jack's sword. This makes it nearly impossible for Jack to beat said robots until he runs into the same scientist a little while later who manages to help him find a way to beat his own creations. I suggest this episode for the battle alone. It's another one of my favorites in that respect. And thirdly, I recommend Samurai vs. Samurai because it shows how faithful Jack is to his morale. He fights a wannabe samurai who talks smack as if it's easy, but Jack tears him apart when he overcomes this poser's aggression and lack of focus in one of the funniest defeats I've ever seen in the show. Samurai Jack has had plenty of representation in other media as well. There were 2 video games published that centered on the show, Samurai Jack the Amulet of Time and Samurai Jack the Shadow of Aku. Unfortunately, as is true with most Cartoon Network video games, they weren't the most exciting things on the planet. But if you're a fan of the show, then I'm sure you can find some enjoyment out of them. The franchise was also featured in a series of comics which began running under IDW Publishing in 2013 and concluded just a little over a year ago. I should also note that the sheer amount of awards this show has won is absolutely astounding. Between 2002 and 2005, it managed to win 11 awards, 4 of which happened to be Emmys. To put this in perspective, I've got the amounts of awards other cartoons earned in their first 4 years of being nominated too. Avatar: The Last Airbender won 9, Rugrats won 5, and Adventure Time won 3. Now obviously there were some different variables to take into consideration, but relatively speaking, that's pretty damn impressive. Could you imagine how many more it could have obtained had the show kept going on? There were originally plans for a feature film in 2002, but that was quickly cancelled due to the mediocre performance of the Powerpuff Girls movie. There's been over a decade of continuous attempts to try and get the project up and running, but, well, sadly it never came to be. Gendy had mentioned it countless times that the movie was still being produced, first as a live action film, then it went 2D, then CGI, but because they never got the film off the ground, the series never received the proper conclusion it deserved.
Until now.
That's right, we're talking about the brand spanking new Samurai Jack revival set to air sometime in 2016 or the year after, and I cannot stress just how excited I am to see it in action. The good news is that unlike the Powerpuff Girls and Teen Titans reboots, Samurai Jack has most of its original team back in command. It's also airing on Adult Swim instead of Cartoon Network, which means we are actually getting more violent action sequences that don't rely on enemies being robots, if you catch my drift. I have a very, very, very good feeling about this one. The real question is, can I recommend this? Well, if you couldn't tell by now, the answer is an absolute yes. If you haven't watched this show yet, then please, just take some time out of your schedule to sit down and give it a chance. Even if it's not your sort of thing, and I totally understand, it's at least good that you tried it out. And for those of you who have watched the show countless times before, go watch it again. I'm sure you'll find something new that you didn't notice the first few times. Here's to the revival of Samurai Jack. Show us what you got, Tartakovsky.
Look, we are both in a hurry, so I shall hang from these planks and you may walk right over.
So you get a peek at me kilt?